Welcome to episode 14 of A Journey Through Papua New Guinea History. My name is Camelo Gima. In this episode, we travel back to Papua in the 1930s. Since 1906, Papua was an Australian territory and was administered from Port Moresby under Lieutenant Governor Sir Hubert Murray. The territory of Papua was governed completely separately from the territory of New Guinea, which in the 1930s, at the time of our story, was administered by Australia from the capital of Rabaul under a League of Nations mandate. Our story focuses on three groups of Papuan medical assistants who were sent to Australia for more advanced medical training between 1933 and 1935. At first glance, this may seem a surprising thing to happen because in the racial discrimination that existed in Papua, opportunities like this were rare. But for a brief moment, a small group of young Papuan men were given the chance to study at the University of Sydney. Sending Papuans overseas to be educated was a bold and controversial experiment, and one that would not be seen again until after the Second World War. First, we need some background to the story.
To understand why this experiment was so remarkable, we need to look at conditions in Papua at the time. The territory of Papua was poor and Port Moresby was small. Only about 2,000 Europeans, or white people, lived there by the early 1930s. The economy depended mainly on copra and rubber, and Australia provided a small annual grant of about £40,000 to help keep the administration running. Education for Papuans had progressed only slowly. Most schooling was run by the missions, and the highest level available was Standard 5, upper primary. There would be no secondary education for Papuans until after World War II. The Methodist, Anglican, Roman Catholic, LMS and Seventh-day Adventist missions, assisted by small government grants, treated diseases wherever they worked. To care for a large and scattered population, the government relied on just 4 European travelling medical officers and 37 native medical assistants. On patrol, they treated malaria, skin infections, ulcers, hookworm, yaws, and many other conditions common in the villages. But this wasn't nearly enough, and in 1932, the Chief Medical Officer of Papua, Dr. Walter Strong, came up with a radical new idea about how to get more medical workers who were capable of leading patrols. Strong said the Australian administration could not afford to appoint more European doctors because of their high salaries. His idea was to increase the number of qualified medical workers by selecting capable Papuans and giving them more advanced training. Their salaries would be much lower than the European doctors. After their extra training, Papuans could lead patrols themselves. At that time, nearly all patrols were led by Europeans' medical officers. Strong first considered sending a select group of students to the medical school at Suva in Fiji. But after discussions with health authorities in Australia, he decided on a different plan. He would send a small group of Papuans to the School of Tropical Medicine at the University of Sydney to do a specially designed 6-month course. Lieutenant Governor Hubert Murray approved the plan. Tuition and accommodation in Sydney would be free, and the total cost, mainly for travel and food, would be about £300. The money would come from taxes paid by Papuans themselves. In early 1933, Strong selected 12 students. They ranged in age from about 14 to 30. Some had worked as medical assistants, and they had all completed Standard 5 at London Missionary Society schools. Strong gave them 6 months of preparatory medical training in Port Moresby, and before they left, a farewell gathering was held at Hanua Bada, where leaders, including Ahuia Ova, spoke with pride and encouragement. In October 1933, the group sailed to Sydney to commence study. They were accompanied by a European medical assistant, E.H. Adams, who supervised them throughout their stay in Sydney. In Sydney, they were housed at the quarantine station, which was in the seaside suburb of Manly. This picture shows their accommodation at the station. From Monday to Friday, led by Adams, the students boarded a ferry at Manly Wharf and sailed across the harbour to the city centre. Then they boarded a tram, which took them to their place of study at Sydney University. The first few days must have been exciting for the young students. This picture shows the first group of medical students of 1933 in preliminary training in Port Moresby. One of these students, Toa Kapena, shown in the front row, second from left, was to become president of the Hanuabada Local Government Council and in 1971 was appointed CBE, or Companion of the British Empire. In Sydney, their curriculum was demanding, covering theoretical and practical subjects. But life was not all study. On Saturdays, they played cricket against church and school teams and went on excursions to see the sights of Sydney. On Sundays, they attended church. Strong, who was also in Sydney, met them once a week to review their progress. Over the next 2 years, 2 further groups of students travelled to Sydney to study at Sydney University. This picture shows the 1934 group in Port Moresby, with Hubert Murray and Walter Strong before their departure. This picture, also taken in Port Moresby, shows the 1935 group. In total, 38 students were trained during those 3 years. By now, the program had begun to produce its own leaders. 3 outstanding graduates from earlier groups, Hera Ganiga, Arua Maria and Lahui Ako, accompanied this third group. Hera and Arua assisted in teaching the new students. It should also be noted that Hera Ganiga later became an officer in the Papuan Medical College and in 1970 was awarded an MBE, or Member of the British Empire. Lahui Ako presented a paper at the 3rd International Health Conference in Sydney describing the work of medical assistants. It was a remarkable moment, a medical trainee addressing an international audience about public health in his own country. It is also interesting to know that Lahui was the father of Reverend Chaplain Major Ray Lahui Ako, whose life is recorded in Volume 1 of the Papua New Guinea Contemporary Dictionary of Biography, which can be accessed free online. The students were praised. Walter Strong said they did very well, especially considering they were studying in a foreign language. Hubert Murray agreed and said he was happy with the work they did when they returned to Papua. The scheme promised to extend medical services into remote districts. Yet, although the study scheme was so successful, it was suddenly brought to an end, and after 1935, no more students were sent to study in Sydney. The question we are left with is, why did this happen? Why was the study scheme suddenly ended? Walter Strong retired in 1938, and with him went the main impetus for the scheme. Another reason for ending the scheme was the opposition to it that came from sections of the European community in Port Moresby. While some in the white population welcomed the scheme because it extended medical services into remote areas, others strongly opposed it. Port Moresby was a European-dominated town, and it was a time of strong racial discrimination. In letters to the local newspaper, some Australians complained that Papuans should not dress in suits and ties, acting as if they were like white people. As a result, when the third group of students departed from Port Moresby, they were dressed in Boy Scouts uniforms instead. Some critics claimed that giving Papuans higher education would turn them into what white people called big heads. They claimed that Papuans would never be proper university students. Others were deeply worried that in Sydney they might come into close social contact with white women. They warned that when the Papuans returned home, they would expect more, and this would help to undermine white prestige. It also seems that the loud opposition helped Hubert Murray recognise the hard truth, and he decided not to send more students to Sydney. He knew that if a Papuan professional elite developed too quickly, it would only be rejected by the white population. In that environment, higher education might produce frustration rather than opportunity. And so the overseas experiment quietly ended.
Training for Papuan medical assistants did continue, but from then on it was carried out in Papua itself rather than overseas. In 1940, a medical assistance school was established at Divinukuari in the Northern Division. Only after the Second World War did the path reopen for higher medical training abroad, when Papua New Guineans began enrolling at the Fiji School of Medicine in Suva. From there emerged a new generation of doctors, nurses, and medical professionals who would help guide the country toward independence and beyond. The Sydney University experiment of 1933 to 1935 lasted only a short time. Just 38 Papuan students took part. Yet its importance went far beyond numbers. At a time when many Australians doubted that Papuans could succeed in advanced education, these young men proved otherwise. They showed determination, intelligence, and discipline and were good students. History often moves forward in small and fragile steps, and this was one of them. The achievements of these students opened minds, challenged old prejudices, and helped lay part of the foundation for the modern Papua New Guinea that would eventually emerge. I look forward to joining you in the next episode, where we will turn to some fascinating events that took place in German New Guinea. Goodbye for now.